the role might have been just as great. Even after slavery was made illegal, ships owned by New Yorkers were found conducting an Africa to Cuba business. In 1859, 85 ships from New York City were supposedly working in the Cuban slave trade. The proceeds were used to add to the treasuries of political organizations and carry elections in nearby states. 1 to only a few of those in the trade owned slaves themselves. Robert Livingston was one of these people. As the elected Speaker of the New York Provincial Assembly in 1718, business kept Livingston in Albany while his wife, Olida, managed their plantation. One letter Robert received from Olida requested that he find old shoes for the Palatines and slaves, who were barefoot. Robert Livingston is one of the few New Yorkers who actually tried farming with black slaves, and when the experiment did not work, the Livingstons kept the slaves as servants. 216 From the Sacred to the Profane. Another letter shows Robert buying a Negro girl for his son Philip. 13 As early as 1690, Robert Livingston had an interest in a Dutch ship that sailed to Madagascar, then Barbados, and finally Virginia. In the 17th and 18th centuries, there was still prejudice against the Scots, even in the melting pot of New York. In order to rise above one's station, the ticket was to marry into a Dutch family, comprising the aristocracy of New York. At the peak of the slave trading business owned by Philip Livingston, Robert's son, the merchant endowed Yale's first professor's chair. Alexander Hamilton, the illegitimate son of a Scottish plantation owner in the Caribbean, followed Livingston's road to fame and fortune by marrying a Dutch woman, Elizabeth Schuyler. He became a Freemason for the connections it offered. After the war, the fact of his low birth was completely forgotten, as he became a member of the elite society of Cincinnati. Hamilton became the antithesis of what Thomas Jefferson held as a role model for the country in formation. Like Jefferson, Hamilton owned slaves and called for their freedom. Unlike Jefferson, who targeted New York as a city of money grubbers, Hamilton's lifetime ambition was to found a bank. Hamilton understood that he who controls the money has the most power. George Washington appointed Hamilton the first Secretary of the Treasury. His first act was to announce that the debts of the new country were to be paid. It was ostensibly a noble idea, but one that was built on an early version of insider trading. Hamilton and his cohorts bought up as much of the war debt as possible at a rate of pennies on the dollar. They were made wealthy when these were paid. Many cried foul at this action, yet Hamilton was a proponent of power without limitation, and despised the checks and balances system. Hamilton then founded New York's first bank, the Bank of New York, in 1784, and brought in 3 other Scots to fill the board. Another early New York bank, the Manhattan Company, was founded by Aaron Burr, who promptly loaned himself a fortune. The Manhattan Company was seized in a hostile takeover by Hamilton's allies, the Master Masons, and their slaves. 217 Livingstons who ousted Burr. A war between Hamilton and Burr ended in the infamous duel that left Hamilton dead, Burr a fugitive, and the stock exchange, the Tontine Coffee House, at that time, closed for a day. The bank survived the scandal, and is still alive and well today under the new name Chase Manhattan. America's Scottish immigrants were tightly knit through masonry and other connections, and were particularly adept at using these connections to organize syndicates, companies, and institutions. Another Scotsman and merchant, Archibald Gracie, started the first savings bank in New York. He had emigrated from Dumfries in 1784, and within 2 decades the sea trade made him one of New York's wealthiest citizens. Gracie is described as fabulously wealthy, and there were probably fewer than 5 men in New York whose fortunes could rival his. Today the Gracie Mansion serves as the home of New York City's mayors, neighbor of the Astors, Rhinelanders, Krugers, and Schermerhorns. Gracie's parties were legend, and the New York literati, including Alexander Hamilton, James Fenimore Cooper, and Washington Irving, were frequent guests. In addition, Gracie is often given credit for developing New York as a seaport. Scotsmen played a key role in establishing banks in Europe as well. The Bank of England was founded in 1694 by William Paterson, a foreign-born Scotsman who had a vision of a world banking system controlled by central banks. That system is in place today. Paterson is also remembered as the promoter of the ill-fated Aryan scheme, in which many Scotsmen died. See Chapter 4, which Livingston would find himself connected to by marriage. Another son of Scotland, John Law, was born around the same time as Bateson, and left his homeland for France, where he started the Banque Generale. The bank brought prosperity to France as it made trade more viable. Law, however, lost his proverbial shot in his own American adventure. He combined the bank with the Mississippi Company, which he established to develop the Louisiana territories in America. The venture ended in bankruptcy, and with Law fleeing for his life. Scots even brought the word dollar into the English language. King 218 from the sacred to the profane James I introduced a 30-shilling coin that became known as the sword dollar, because of the design. The Scots used the term dollar to distinguish their currency from that of their overbearing neighbour to the south. The word took on an anti-English, independent connotation which the Scots brought with them to the Americas. Pennsylvania. The First Continental Congress was held in Philadelphia, one of the colony's most important port cities. The meeting was attended by many in the slave trade. While Pennsylvania was not a plantation state and Philadelphia was not as active in the trade as some colonies, its merchants did participate. Thomas Willing, of the Willing and Morris firm, was one of the merchants in attendance. His partner, Morris, represented one of Europe's largest slave merchants, Foster Cunliffe. Philip Livingston, whose slave ship the Wolf plied the Atlantic, also attended. Present from the South were plantation owners including future President Madison, George Mason of Virginia, and Henry Laurens of South Carolina. Philadelphia's Society of Friends, also called the Quakers, did not approve of the trafficking of human lives. However, some individual Quakers did make profits from the trade. Friends involved in slave trading included William Frampton, who carried the first slaves to Philadelphia, as well as James Claypole, Jonathan Dickinson, and Isaac Norris. Even the always industrious Benjamin Franklin, who was a friend to the Montaudoin family, considered entering the slave trade. He also entertained the idea to breed slaves, rather than import them, in Florida. The City of Brotherly Love was founded by William Penn, whose Quaker beliefs earned him the enmity of his own father. In England Ben fought for religious toleration, and was imprisoned in the Tower of London. There he penned his text "No cross, no crown," and advised his jailers they had better issue his death sentence, as he would not change his philosophy. After his release, Penn continued his fight and Master Masons, and their slaves 219 was jailed several times. He finally petitioned the king for a charter to start a colony in the New World. The king, no doubt relieved to be getting rid of the trouble-stirring Penn, granted the man's wish. Penn was a paragon of religious toleration, and envisioned a land where all were free to practice their faith. Volta, Ben Franklin's brother in the Masonic Nine Sisters Lodge, called Penn the one who could boast of bringing a new golden age to earth. From his Pennsylvania paradise Penn wrote that men were born with a title to perfect freedom. Sadly, followers of this paragon of toleration and freedom were silent on the issue of slavery, although the Quakers would later be counted among the first abolitionists. Virginia was a planter state, and as such the state's aristocracy was made up of people who had great expanses of land, and slaves to maintain the plantations. Its history starts with the chartering of the Virginia Company in 1606 to London's leading merchants, including Rick Hardhack and Sir Thomas Smith, the son of one of Raleigh's financial backers. From the earliest days, life in Virginia was tough, and the actions of the powerful handful that constituted the authority might shock those who accept religious freedom as the reason for the colonization of the Americas. Blasphemy and sacrilege were crimes that were subject to the death penalty,